Welcome to Under the Rug at Work, where I shine light on things that are normally swept under the rug. Today, I'm chatting with Dr. Pat Ferris from Canada about belonging and compassion. Pat is a therapist, researcher, coach, and trainer, and she's been working in the area of workplace bullying for over 25 years. Pat has a PhD in industrial organizational psychology. Thank you so much for joining me, Pat.
Oh, it's such a privilege to work with you, Nicole. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. And so looking forward to this chat because it is something that we just don't acknowledge and don't think about. And the research and the chats that we've had in the past about belonging and compassion and the importance of it is not known, I think, as much as we need to. So I'm really excited for this chat. But to start with, what does it mean to belong at work or to belong in a team?
We're a species that needs to belong wherever we are. So belonging is about a sense of being esteemed, meaning that people respect you, they respect your knowledge, uh, meaning being a valued member of the group, meaning that you've got some control over the way you do things, and that there's some pleasure, that people have fun and connect, share and talk. It's a very simple concept that I think most of us would know, but it's a very hard behaviorally in many workplaces to remember to do that and to remember to create a belonging that fits with your workplace. Because the belonging that you create in the workplace may be a different kind of belonging or a little harder to develop than the belonging that you have with your family, with your friends, with a sports team, with a faith group. Those may all be where you all have similar values and ideas about how you do things. So one of the most important things about belonging at work is that you know what's the culture, what that you co-create a way of belonging that works for everybody. So that requires commitment from every single person to do some work on that.
Yeah. And I don't think people don't think about it on purpose. I think we get so busy and we're just focused on the work that and especially, when we're working from home and there's not that connection, it's just something that isn't prioritized and gets forgotten a bit. Do you think?
Oh, I absolutely agree. And it's sad because we know that when people feel a sense of belonging, that they feel better and they then work better and then they create better climate, culture, and better performance in whole for their organization. So there is something in it for individuals to focus on is that sense of connection actually is helpful to their health and their experience. And there's something in it for organizations because people perform better when they feel support and value and have some fun.
Yeah. And we know that instinctively in ourselves. But I think
Yeah.
we need to look outside of that and, make sure that everyone feels as though they belong. Yeah.
Well, and the reality is that workplaces are really diverse now and they're getting more and more diverse. So creating a common set of norms and values and really working on understanding each other and caring about each other takes hard work.
Mm.
It takes hard work, and we have to want and be willing to go into our workplaces and want to do that.
Yeah, and with diversity comes innovation and creativity and new ideas, and we really want that. But
Absolutely.
often the people stuff is the tough stuff, which is why I love chatting about it, especially with experts like yourself.
Mhm. Organizations that don't, or teams or cultures or even whole organizations that don't pay attention to creating belonging put themselves at risk for the very things that we're talking about in these podcasts, which is discrimination, bullying, harassment, turnover, conflict. Um, that's the risk if you don't if you don't allow people and facilitate how you create a sense of belonging.
Yeah, the negative impacts of that are huge. If someone feels like they don't belong, they're on that outer, right? And they don't feel like that they can speak up. They don't feel like they can say, hey, I've got a problem, or I need some help with this. It becomes quite isolating. And I know you've spoken about some of the reasons why it's so important. Is there anything else that we might have missed, and anything you wanted to share about the importance?
Well, you know, what you just said, I think, is a really important point, that people feel isolated if they feel like they don't belong. And when a human being feels isolated from a group, that is one of the most painful things that can happen to someone. It's meant to be painful because in Mother Nature's wisdom, you know, if we're excluded from the group, that means we're doing something wrong. So that's the feeling that our social monitoring system picks that up right away. And alarm bells go off. I'm isolated. People don't want me. And so, you know, there's creating culture and teams that so that everybody belongs, but there's also the other side of it where there's really, really strong culture and strong in-group mentality. And we see this in military, policing, paramedic, very strong, or, you know, healthcare. And somebody new comes in and people do not work at admitting them or belonging. And, you know, we've seen this, you know, with gender, with race, all through, you know, the last several decades. Um, it sets up a tremendously harmful dynamic of exclusion, in group, out group, and pain that actually ends up pain for everybody. And in recent history across the world, we're seeing it play out in social media. That when it results in that real severe exclusion that we call bullying and harassment, it it damages everyone.
Mm. And our brain sees physical threats and injuries the same as psychological, and not belonging is part of that. That's correct? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not belonging in some ways is often a bigger threat than a physical threat. You know, physical threat, you can kind of do something about. You can run away from it, you can fight, collapse. I think we're more wired to deal with that than the physical threat, usually, unless you're in a war setting, you know, will usually go away. With the psychological threat of being excluded from a group, our brain is constantly monitoring that. So that becomes chronic. And as we know from all sorts of research, the impact of chronic stress is related to almost every chronic disease that we have, including suicide. But we now, as you know, in some of our podcasts have explored the neurobiology of it. We now know that those experiences, you know, are related to not just changes in how parts of the brain function, but changes in the structure of it as well. So this is serious stuff.
Yeah, and we do go into detail in the lived experience summit with yourself and
Yes.
Nicole, which we will share
Yeah.
below. But do you think when it comes to, you know, breaking your arm, it's a physical, my arm is broken, it'll have time to repair, and it's my arm. Whereas when it's a psychological threat, it's more of internalized, it's me and me as a whole being and a whole person. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we can point to diseases and mental illnesses, but one of the most deepest pains is the brokenness of me.
Yeah.
My identity is broken. People don't want me. I don't fit. I've been excluded. I've been hurt. I've been abused. And the loss of self is not an easy repair. And sometimes it's impossible or never repairs. And it changes life forever.
Mm.
And so we need to be really careful
Mm-hmm.
about how we treat each other because the impact can be far greater than a broken arm or even some chronic diseases.
And we're seeing that with the statistics coming out of Australia. Mental health claims are increasing, workers' comp claims are increasing. People are taking much longer to get back to work if they ever do at all. So the stats are backing up what we're talking about, and the importance of making a psychologically safe workplace and making sure that people feel that they belong. So how can leaders make sure that their team members feel like they belong, or even other team members?
Yeah, the role of leaders is critical because people will mark off leadership behavior. So they really, I mean, certainly others can help set the tone, but a leader will set the tone. Uh, and and so the leader's interest in just getting to know people, it's not hard. That, maybe you start meetings with, let's share a little bit about each other so we get to know each other, or let's talk about what's on your mind about work. So, I'm gonna use an acronym that two colleagues of mine developed and teach in the healthcare system. Now I'm really proud to have worked with them, and it's Jody Ploquin and Jennifer Williams who developed this in 2022. And it's a nice, just quick idea about how leaders can create belonging or healing in a workplace or restoring things. So, first off, it needs to be safe, to physically safe. I mean, I've certainly heard about, yeah, about violence in the workplace, but it needs to be psychologically safe. And we talk about that a lot, but being psychologically safe means that people can disagree, people can bring up ideas, people can express concerns, and they'll be listened to. Okay, that's the part that creates safety, is when they're listened to. You can disagree with it, you can say we can't do much about this or that, but I'll try and do this. But it's the listening that's really important about that. Um, and so it's a SAFER, SAFER acronym. So S stands for safety, and A stands for awareness. So we're now more and more trauma informed, that people come to work with trauma, that some of the experiences they can have are traumatic, that we need to be aware of culture, climate, how things are. So it's that walking around as a leader or as a person. Um, it's simple human interactions that create this. It's about having voice, fostering voice, saying, speak up, it's okay, let's talk. Empathy and compassion come next. And empathy is understanding what it's like to be in the other's shoes. So when somebody says they're having a hard time, or you see someone having a hard time, rather than putting them in a big performance appraisal process, or if there's disagreement or conflict, instead of stepping straight into formal investigations, that you look into things, that you understand them, that you seek some informal ways of dealing with them, and you do it with empathy for all parties, understanding what it's like to be in their shoes. And compassion is acting on that. So saying, how can I support you? We have these resources that might support you. What can I do to help in doing it? So it might be saying, I'll check in on you next week, and actually doing that. And then the last one is making sure that connections stay connected, or restoring connections that are broken. So building trust in your own competence, in what you say you're going to do, and in communication, um, feed into that last section. So it sounds like a lot, but it's actually, I'm hopeful, the way most of us were raised by our mothers and fathers.
Yeah.
What we learned in kindergarten. And I don't mean to make fun of that. I mean it as something serious, that at some level we all know how to do this.
Mm.
We need to have the courage, like the chief courage officer here. We need to have courage. We need to step up, and we need to care. We need to care about humanity.
Mm.
I know that's a big broad talk, but that's where I'm feeling today, after seeing several clients talking about their sadness in humanity.
Yeah. And I like to say, put yourself in their shoes. Like, coming
Yeah.
into a new organization or a new team is a little scary, especially if you're not face to face. And how do you get to know and trust and build relationships with these people? And it is, the actions are quite simple. It's about smiling, it's about asking people about who they are. And I find that having a meal together as well, so going out, even if it's just bringing your lunch and going out to a park and just getting to know each other in a less
Mm.
formal situation, once you know someone, you're able to better understand them and better communicate with them. And they, having something simple like that when you come into a new team really brings you into the fold. It means that you're not on the outside. You don't kind of feel like you're just coming into a meeting and want to wave. I mean, I know of some people who have come into a new team and a new role, and the manager hasn't even introduced them. So little things like that are very big.
Well, it's interesting. I was having a discussion with colleagues yesterday about exactly the same thing, where there was no onboarding, no orientation, people weren't introduced, and it turns out that they had very different ideas and personalities and all those things that can create some tension. But if managed and learned about in a gentle way, don't have to lead to that. But because there was no introductions, there was no attempt to bring in, create belonging, understand, and have a gentle introduction, that bad things happen.
Yeah.
Tension rose, and people felt hurt and traumatized. And it's just an example of, as human beings, it is incredibly easy to damage us by those sorts. We're strong in so many other ways. We can go defend our countries, we can work hard, we can survive terrible challenges. But when you damage or don't create belonging, you can cut someone to the core.
Yeah. And just another practical tip that came to my mind as you were talking about that is, either if it's, working from home situation or face to face, a really good idea is getting the new person or the person who may not know everyone quite well, chatting with each of the other individual team members for, even if it's just half an hour. Do that proper onboarding and understanding what your other team members do, so that you know how to work with them and who to ask for maybe difficult questions, or if people get stuck. If you don't have something as simple as that, you don't, as a new person, really know who to go to if you have a question. So often we keep that inside because you don't want to seem silly, but if you're building those relationships, and you can do that in 30 minutes, just an overview, and how are you, and where do you live, where do you come from, why did you join here, just some of those, be interested in other people, and it really does start to build those relationships and build those trust and make sure people feel like they belong.
Yeah, be curious,
Yes.
be inviting. Understand that as human beings, we all need that connection. And if you don't want to do that, then my question is, what's blocking that? What's happened to you? What's happened in your workplace? If you feel resistant or angry, or even revengeful, to check those feelings. If you're having those feelings, what's going on with you? Either what's happened to you and your own trauma, or what's happening in your work group or your organization. And to really step back and reflect on whether you want to be part of that, or part of being the change in the world, as Gandhi would say, that you want to see. Yeah.
Yeah. And just adding to that, if you're a leader and you're having some of those feelings, reach out to someone to ask for help and support, because as a leader, you really need to be able to bring that belonging and compassion to your role, because your role is more than just doing the work. It's about bringing people together and getting the best out of them. So if those are some of the feelings you're having, that will definitely hold you back from doing that. Yeah. And doing your best at your job.
Yeah. Or if you think it's not my job, or I'm too busy, or I'm too tired, um, those are red flags to you that you're actually off the rails as a leader.
Mm. And we need to be comfortable with saying that. We need to be in the right role for the right person and the right personality. And if that's not you right now, that's okay. But put your hand up and say, how can I be there if that's what you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
If
Mm-hmm.
not, find the right role either for the team member or for yourself if you're a leader, so that you can be the best you can be.
Absolutely.
And not cause damage.
Well, and that's not easy to do.
Yeah.
And in some organizations, it's impossible to do. And again, I'm going to go back to the idea of courageous leadership. Be the chief courage officer. I love your CCO title.
And egos often get in the way as well, don't they? And we want that job title, or we want that the pay packet, or yeah, there's a lot of things that can hold us back. But Pat and I are giving permission to just reach out and ask for help so that you can be the great person that you want to be. But I do want to just touch a bit more on compassion, because you've spoken about that a little bit, and it is a really important skill for especially leaders in the workplace. But some see it as unnecessary fluffy stuff. Are you able to shed some light on compassion and the benefits of being compassionate at work?
There is actually an entire book written on, it's called Compassionomics. Um, and it's actually a summary of the research about how compassion impacts not just the individual, but the performance of an organization. And the evidence is clear. In medical settings, it reduces errors and death. In other business settings, it increases profitability. Uh, the it, it feeds into people's health. It makes better teams. So let me describe first or now what compassion really is, because if I ask people what's compassion, I think they're going to go, people might think compassion is the same as empathy, but compassion is a step beyond empathy. So, empathy is taking the time to understand what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes. And it's not sympathy. Sympathy is feeling sorry for someone, rescuing them, thinking that you need to take responsibility. Empathy is simply about understanding when someone's suffering and having a hard time, and being able to say, um, to reflect and give some statements that the other person knows and gets, that you understand what it's like to be in their shoes. So that's incredibly important on itself. Compassion is actually taking a behavior and acting on that. So if somebody tells you they're suffering at work from overwork, or they don't know how to do something, um, you know, empathy is, you've joined the team. There's a lot to learn. We have a lot of platforms. I used to own a clinic, and we had this just dreadful, and I mean dreadful, booking billing system, that when people came in to take a position at the front, I would say, "Well, what are you going to do when you cry?" And everybody would say, "I'm not going to cry." And I would say, "Well, I cry. I cry frequently over it, but it's what we got. It's the best we can have right now, but it's difficult." Okay, so that's empathy. And that's actually risk management, as we're telling people that it's okay to come to me and say you're frustrated, and that you can ask for help in this, because we've all needed to do that. But compassion is when they're having that hard day, when I can walk out and see somebody struggling with that I say, take a break. Let's go into the kitchen. If they're crying, let me give you a Kleenex. Let me get you tea or coffee. I've struggled with, not making it terrible by saying, you know what, we've all struggled with that. That's an action that I could take. Or, in other settings, just saying to someone, you want to talk, or maybe, hey, why don't we, if we can, go for a walk, or is there a resource that I can put in place for you to help you with this? I've got training things. Can you do this? That's action. So moving the psychological and emotional component of understanding what it's like to be in someone's shoes to an action. So understanding when there's somebody suffering, being motivated to take action. Understanding that suffering is universal. We've all suffered, and then taking what action you can on that. That's compassion.
Yeah. I always love talking to you, Pat, because you're such a wealth of knowledge. You're so passionate and you have so much background and history and you're working in it. So you really know, and you want to help and make a change. And I believe you really are. So thank you so much for joining me. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before we sign off?
I'm going to broaden this out to just a statement on humanity. There is so much need for compassion in the world today. To see everyone as belonging to humanity, despite our differences, despite disagreements, that we are part of the same group. And if we start with one person, and if that starts at work, or if you take this into your own personal life, it builds one person at a time. So all I can do is encourage each person who listens to this to reflect on their own humanity and to choose an act of compassion towards someone, somewhere, somehow.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pat. I really appreciate your time, especially being, all the way over in Canada, almost finishing your day. We're just starting it here.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for your wisdom, your courage, your insights. And if anyone wants to learn more about Pat, you can connect with her on LinkedIn or visit her website, patferris.com, and I'll put all the links that we've spoken about today in the show notes as well. Thank you, Pat.
Take care.